Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck design video. Today I'm going to be showing the second part of a two-part video here. The Peer Through Time pre-constructed deck was the first part of this. This is the Lorthos optimization. So if you didn't take the time to watch the previous video, it's just an unboxing of the Peer Through Time Mono Blue Commander 2014 pre-con deck. Where it comes with all sorts of fun cards and 3 potential generals. And in that video I talked about some of the cards, their actual value, their worthwhileness. This video right here is of a Lorthos optimization, where I'm restricting myself to cards just from this set. This entire set is all monocolored decks. That means I have added artifacts and lands from the other 4 precons. If you notice, he's not in his sleeve. Drolf, while I liked his ability, and I have played with him, he did not actually make the cut. So he's actually just not in the deck. He is a very fun general. I would suggest giving him a try if you like generals with activated abilities. I have a pretty fun Rockamar video posted that has a lot of the same tech that I ran with Drolf, because with untapped shenanigans you can start making a very fun thing, and exiling opponents' decks are great. Teferi here is in a sleeve. He's actually main decked. I didn't think he was good enough as a general. There wasn't enough in this precon to actually make him useful as a general on his own. Like, yeah, you can combo with Chain Veil with him and enough mana, or maybe some artifact accelerant, but that's just I don't really see him as being a plausible general. And his ability is just, the untapped ability is the only reason he really made the cut here. So Lorthos here, I love gigantic, like, random generals that just don't really see play. For example, Traumaticus, when he came out, I loved the deck I built around him as well. Lorthos is very thematic. It's, a lot of people don't notice, but he has a pretty nice theme of 8 going on here. He costs 8, 5, and 3 blue. He's an 8/8. His ability taps 8, and it costs 8 to activate. There are actually 8 lines of text here. There's 8 hedrons in the artwork. There's, if I remember, there's about 8 different sequences, or essentially events of the number 8 that occur in this card. It's just very flavorful. But what he does here, he's just a 8 for an 8/8, that when you declare him as an attacker, I may pay 8 to tap down 8 permanents, and they don't untap on the next step. So in 1v1, if I'm actually allowed to get that declaration off, there's a good chance I'm just going to win, because I can start tapping down mana sources and any potential threats. Multiplayer, although, he's very difficult to run, because he is the obvious threat, so he needs to stay in the command zone until there's only one opponent left. Near the end of the video, I'll go ahead and chat a little bit about politics and how it's usually best to run something like this. You can't really run this like a lot of other decks. You can't really Jedi everybody, and sometimes a lot of the things you put out in play are just so blatantly obvious that you can't really play it politically too easily with this. So there's a couple tricks and whatnot. So before we get started, I'll go through the entire deck itself. Essentially, well, I also have all these extra tokens. Essentially, I've been using these new sleeves now. Since General Tuck has been removed, I usually keep a duplicate General. So one in the normal sleeve and one in not. So I just have the normal General here now. I don't have to rely on the extra copies of a General just in case one gets tucked. Let's go ahead and scooch him over here and start with the creatures. So, well, actually, before I go, let's reconfirm why I chose him. Some people, when they get into EDH, they literally just pick up the precons and run with it. They don't really understand what they're doing when it comes to trying to develop the deck. The best thing to do is to consider some kind of win condition. Like, when you look at these 3 possible generals, who actually dictates the obvious win condition here? Stitcher, he can make an army. Well, very slowly, but over time you can make an army. Teferi, he can combo with the Chain Veil, but essentially he's there just to untap and promote counter magic or extra mana or draw. So somewhere in your deck is the win condition. Then there's this giant thing that can general someone out for 21 general damage pretty easily. So from these 3 generals, obviously this is the easy one to build around. There's not enough to make him work. There's definitely not enough tech to make him work. So I would suggest, again, as newer players, if you are interested in getting into EDH, first I would suggest getting one of last year's precons, 2013 3-color decks, because monocolor decks are hard to run in EDH because you're limiting yourself to your color. but do really consider what your deck is trying to do. How does your deck win? And this deck wins with giant creatures, especially Lorthos. So let's get on to the creatures itself. The second thing to consider when you're trying to develop a deck, so you ideally have an idea of how your deck's going to win, you need to then consider what it takes to get to that win condition. Lorthos is extremely expensive to cast, and he's a giant body, so this deck needs two things. It needs card draw and ramp. It needs the ramp to get the card draw, and more card draw to get to more ramp, so it eventually has enough mana to activate and cast Lorthos. So if you look at that pre-con video I listed before this, there's a lot of stuff that just did not make the cut. Some things just did not do enough, and we were able to add in lots of extra accelerant, lots of card draw that the blue deck didn't already have. So things that stuck around, the Azure Mage, it is a repeatable card draw. Granted, 4 mana is expensive, but it's something I can do at the end of someone's turn. Same thing, this one replaces itself. There's about 26 or 7 cards out of this 100 card deck that have the ability to either replace themselves, like draw a card upon entry, or they have some value where they net another card in some shape or form. That's 26 out of 100 cards in this deck that just straight up have a potential of replacing themselves. So that's good. For example, Maul Drifter, when it enters, draw 2. Burnished Heart is a version of Ramp. This is something I was able to get from, I believe, the Duretti deck. This is a very good card because I do have one way of recurring a creature, but basic lands are harder to remove than other mana accelerant, like Artifact Ramp. Pilgrim's Eye just replaces itself, gets its land. Side Robot, I also got this, I think, from the Duretti deck. Just good ramp as well. So all this is you're seeing is literally just ways of getting more mana, more ramp, more cards. There's a few techie cards that I did leave in the deck. There's only 3 morph cards I kept. Willbender is really good at keeping Lorthos safe. I don't really have a lot of counter spells in this deck, so when it comes to creature removal, I really want to keep him around because I could redirect their removal to another creature. The Sirens is also a very fun political card because I can redirect an attack. This has recently saved my butt because a Prosh player literally could not kill me when he desperately needed to. And this is another defensive nature card where it spams out tokens if it dies. This is very fun if you get the, I think it's Doubling Season or Parallelized. One of those 2 doubles the token entry, so something like this is really great. Exodron is a good removal for generals. Now that tucking is no longer here, you're seeing, well, in my groups at least, I'm seeing a higher trend of more cost-efficient counterspells, more prison effects, and shit like this. I have a pretty negative opinion about the removal of tuck, but I understand. I actually don't understand why hell they did that. So, but for what this pre-constructed list has, the 2014 cards, this is essentially my best general answer. Ironically enough, this is a really good removal for blue. Mono blue doesn't get good removal for creatures like Destruction or Exile, and this is fantastic, especially when you can blink him. Magosi Sphinx is also really good at drawing. Essentially, again, wait till the end of someone's turn, or if he's going to get removed, draw a couple cards. And Factor Fiction on wings. And we have some big beaters. The Lieutenant is always good. Don't really care about who's Lieutenant or the Lieutenant effect, since normally I don't have these 2 at the same time. Using Lorthos is a late game general. I mean, from what I've play tested so far, I've sometimes rammed him out as early as turn 4 once and 5 a few times. So he's situational, but he's usually there just to get me some extra cards. 5/4, 5/5 hexproof is always good. Wormcoil is one of the direct upgrades to some of the big beefy creatures the blue deck came with. This came from the Duretti deck also. And Steel Hellkite did come in the mono blue deck, which I think is weird. This is a card that almost did not make the cut. It just doesn't do enough in my opinion. As 6 for 5/5 Flying Shroud is nice. There's a nice equipment package in here that the mono white deck gave us, so this usually ends up being just a vanilla thing. The effect looking at the top is nice if you have like fetch lands or a shuffle effect. There is nothing like that in this deck. Frost Titan is decent. It's not something I would actually consider running in a mono blue deck. I don't think he does enough. but in recent gameplay, kicking Rite of Replication on him and then recalling and recasting rights to have 11 Titans tends to win you games. Battlesphere also came from the mono red deck. It is another good game-ending card. If you look at that pre-con, the mono blue list, there's lots of late-game creatures, like the Hover Guard, for example. Those are pretty underwhelming when compared to something like this. Kozileks are a good reanimation spell, and two big Leviathan-type creatures. Well, one's a Kraken, one's Leviathan. People don't seem to remember that when you spend a card and it comes out, it actually has haste. This one's really nice at doing a tap-down effect. There's a good theme in the pre-con about tapping down creatures, and making copies of this one with like Cackling Counterpart and whatnot. Actually, pretty good effect. Let's go on to the small amount of spells that I chose to keep in here. We have Pognify. I love making things monkeys. Again, I really wish that they also gave us the Rapid Hybridization. Those are two really good removal spells in mono blue, and yeah. Turn to Frog is another really good techie card. Recently had some fun when someone was trying to wreck my board with a... oh, what's that demon called? The Pestilence Demon. And of course it killed itself because it turned to a frog. Again, another spell that can replace itself. Cyclonic Rift is fantastic. I really love Theft. If you haven't noticed the playmat, the active trees in the background, I love Theft effects. I kind of wish this was a red spell. I know it doesn't give haste, and that's the sucky part. But the ability to gain up to 3 creatures, that's something that I would assume would have been red. But I guess it's both red and blue that have Theft effects. There are only 2 counter spells in the whole deck. Both of them do replace themselves. One only hits creatures, which kind of sucks. Then we have Cackling Counterpart, which is usually going to make some kind of value creature. Again, big draw and a nice bounce. This one is, again, this is something you would typically want to think of Blue Sun Zenith, which obviously was not on the deck, but this is good instant speed draw. And you can target your opponent. It just doesn't shuffle in like Blue Suns. Call to Mind is almost always there just to go get Rites of Replication back. Early game draw. Mid-game draw, again, something not as fast as I like. This one has, of course, hopefully no one will remove my giant octopus if this isn't what I'm trying to draw from, but of course this may essentially just draw me 3 cards. Typically I want something big in play, so this will draw me like 8 cards, but this gives the opponent a chance to remove, and it just kicks down to the next item that costs more. And this is probably one of our better win conditions of the deck, past the giant spaghetti monster. While we're on colored permanents, again, there's Teferi. He did make the cut simply because he is another drawing machine. And there's quite a bit of artifact accelerant coming up. Let's go ahead and get that out of the way because it is right here. What is this? I think there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Well, there's a sun in here too. Yeah. Anyways, there's about 12 rocks. I think I'm running 38 lands and 12 artifact accelerants. So yeah, just about 50 forms of mana in this deck. Every single one I could get, essentially, I put in here because, again, the general is the easiest win condition in the deck. This is not a very strong deck, but if you're running Lorthos, you need to get him out. And if he is ideally your win condition, you need to have the mana to get him out fast. So we have 12 rocks. There's also a caged sun over here somewhere. So essentially 50 mana sources and 1 mana doubler. So Everflowing Chalice, so far, usually when I cast it, it's tapping for 4 or more. Bauble is a direct land into play. It's a good form of ramp in non-green. Then, of course, the classic Soul Ring, and the classic Diamond, and Mind Stone, so it can replace itself. Some of these, I got these out of other decks. A lot of the artifacts coming up here are just from other decks. So it's the fixed version of Soul Ring, I suppose. Gains a little life. I just like this because I can sack it late game if I need to draw. Very slow target removal. I don't normally like it when development splashes and destroy any permanent into a colorless format. It's okay, I guess. It's just 7 to activate. It's really expensive, but it's still another mana rock. Good mana rock. Another quote-unquote fixed version of Soul Ring. It's kind of slow. And this one I usually just draw 3 cards off of because by the time, again, that's like 12 rocks and 38 lands. I almost never really need the mana from this. It's just there to draw me more. Let's go on through the other value artifacts. Again, a lot of these I picked up from the other precons. So these two just enter the battlefield and give me some kind of advantage. They're essentially there to help me thin out the deck, lower my curve, get some replacement effects. I do have the land that allows me to sacrifice an artifact so I can eventually gain from, or these will just linger until the board gets wiped of artifacts, and I'll then gain an advantage at that time. There's also the Evolving Wilds in the deck, and I think Terramorphic Expanse too. So while this is a very slow drawing mechanic in late game, this can really kind of do a comeback. The Evolving Wilds fetch lands are nice with this too, but I don't have fetch lands obviously in here, so this can help me draw a whole bunch. It's just not as fast as I typically like. Disc, of course, stayed in the deck. Caged Sun for lots and lots of mana. Essentially, if I can ramp Caged Sun out before turn 4, I'm going to land Lorthos very quickly. And if the opponent doesn't have an answer, it's usually game if it's 1v1. But again, I usually play this in multiplayer, so that doesn't happen too often. And Spine also came over as another target destruction. I do again have the land coming up that I can use to destroy or sacrifice an artifact so I can keep reusing it. It is an expensive combination that usually only happens once per turn. It's still a repeatable destroy effect. Thanks to the white deck, I did get a couple equipment. I didn't put all the artifacts in here. If you noticed, there's other things like Predator Flagship that I could have included. Didn't think they were really worth the cut. But Skull Clamp is good. Boots are really good on Lori there. Sword for Vigilance and Trample. Trample on Lorthos is great. Same thing. Warhammer is my only form of lifelink. And I wasn't about to include this, but again, this is a big mana deck. Every single time I play tested so far, I've had no problem casting and equipping this on like the same turn Lorthos, or on the turn after Lorthos has been out. There's just so much mana that this deck can produce. But let's go on to the lands and wrap it up here. So again, there are 38 lands total, and I kept a couple and imported a couple as well. So this one is a nice little accelerant since I can morph it, and essentially it just cheats itself into play as land. Temple made it in. I was kind of surprised this wasn't in the blue precon. Same thing, of all the precons, I would expect the blue one to have Reliquary Tower, but it didn't actually have that. Tech Edge stayed in there for a little bit of removal. It helps if I need to target bounce something. This is really important land, so I can help sacrifice some of my artifacts, gain a little bit of life, and start recycling that spine. If I need to recur something, there's lots of artifacts. If you notice, by the way, I didn't even bother including the Sapphire Medallion, the medallion that lowers blue, because I drastically increased the number of colorless spells in this deck. So that essentially made my blue spell count, I think, half. Yeah, I think I added like maybe 15 to 20 colorless effects. So that essentially became an unreliable form of accelerant. So that didn't last, but this is really good at getting something back that's been spent. And yeah, there are these two guys. Again, this is really nice if I am just needing to draw extra cards off the, whatever that little Seer Sundial thing is. Really good ramp, essentially giving Haro to any kind of color instead of green. And then the two cycle guys, so I can dump these and maybe get them back later. And then I actually went and got all the same artwork of this one right here. I really like the artwork number 325, and I think it felt better for Lorthos than the other ones provided. But yeah, this is the current design I'm running. If you looked at that other precon, then you'll notice there's lots of things just missing. I didn't really feel half the morph creatures were good enough. And some of the other effects that blue gave us just were not good enough either. Oh, that's starting to get a little fuzzy there. Let me go ahead and pop it back. That's a little bit better. But so again, if you're new to EDH, again, I would highly suggest not getting the monocolor precons. They are functional and playable against each other, but just last year's precons I honestly think are stronger. Limiting yourself to one color does make your land base more cost efficient, but you can make a multicolor deck with a functional land base also on a budget. Check out my, there's a video posted of one of my Jaleva decks. It's the Burn budget deck, where that land base is perfect, and it's honestly probably like $5 or less. A 3-color deck like last year's Bant deck is one I would always suggest because you're in easy colors to improve the deck. If you look at some mono blue decks and you want to start improving your deck, the quote of optimization starts making for a very expensive build. Now, it's kind of hard to tell or teach or advise people how to play politically, like giving political advice when playing EDH. You can't really treat your opponents like they don't know what's happening. If you treat your opponent like an idiot, they will obviously just retaliate and kill you. Playing politics in EDH kind of comes up to, you want to persuade someone to do something for you, that like spend resources to removal, not to kill you, to target someone else, something like that. And persuading someone to do that is very difficult, especially when you happen to have islands on your side of the table. There's a trust issue there. The only thing I can suggest is that more practice makes perfect, because when it comes to politics, it takes a lot. It's not just finding the correct verbiage, like the exact words to say something, to manipulate someone. You have to have the right tone. You have to have a level of trust with that person. Some people just don't like you and they won't believe you. Some people are smart and they won't fall for your trap, and it's never going to always work. And really, it just takes practice. And sometimes politics aren't even worth the effort, because sometimes when you're playing against veteran players, it's just a waste of time. But obviously, when you're playing something with Lorthos, you need to deploy as much political effort as you can in multiplayer, because you are playing an 8-mana costing late game general. This is not anything like my Chroma decks. I love my Chroma decks. They are also late game generals, but she has a tendency to one-hit kill people. Lorthos requires way too much support to guarantee a win, especially in multiplayer when there's more answers. And all the support for Lorthos is lots of drawing and lots of ramp, and all that ramp is in the form of artifacts. So with only 2 counterspells in this deck, there's not enough to really promote and protect him. What I would suggest if you're doing something like this is to keep your win conditions safe. Keep him in the command zone till you can guarantee your win. And in this restriction, that's kind of difficult. But what I would again suggest is just keep on playing. Find more opponents. Broaden your groups and stop playing with the same exact people you always play with. Go to your local shop and play with strangers. The more opponents and more deck archetypes that you experience, the better and more experience you will have. You will also be exposed to more cards, more combos, more just better ways of improving your own skill set and your decks. Yeah, I could probably rant on this one for a while. I'm going to stop there. On a sidetrack, I know I've been posting a lot of budgety decks recently. There's a reason for that. Financially, I've been supporting someone for a very long time, and they passed a while ago. So I've actually been using up a lot of my decks. I consider Magic a financial resource itself, so when it comes to me being financially busted, I actually start selling some of my expensive cards. I do have a few Gucci decks left, and since the person that passed away recently was actually the same person who gave me my Bladewing, I've excessively pimped out that Bladewing deck, so I'll be re-uploading that shortly. While I do miss them terribly, I have been left in a very big financial strain. Also, I've been my favorite colors in EDH are always going to be mono red. Is that plural? Well, anyways, it's always mono red. I've also been, I don't want to say tilting, because my mono red decks always fare fantastically. Well, fare pretty well against different players. But I've been kind of bored with some of the mono red plays. Like most of the generals, I've given a good try. So what I'm thinking is that if the mono red Chandra from Origins is rubbish, I'm going to give mono red a break, and I'm probably going to run Warbeard as a general for a while. I'll just splash a little bit of black on one of my mono red decks and hopefully have a funny deck to post shortly. But yeah, any ideas, any info, if you've ever done mono or a self-restricted decks, I'm always interested in that kind of thing. Definitely share.